Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share it with your family and friends. I got a great guest coming on the program. I have Joel Pollak, who is the host and the editor-at-large, Breitbart News, Sirius XM Patriot 125. He's also the author of a brand new book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Joel, welcome to the program. You got a great book coming out. Everyone should take a look at it. And how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me and allowing me the chance to talk about the book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days.
Well, I think it's an important book, but first, Trump has to get into office. He has to win the election, and it seems that the Democrats are using the Joe Biden 2020 strategy. They're trying to make sure that Kamala Harris is always on teleprompter, always on script, limit her appearances, interviews. And so they only have to do this, especially now that Democrat National Convention is starting. They really only have to do this for about 80 days. And they were able to hide Biden's cognitive decline for the last 4 years to people that were not paying attention. Anyone that was paying attention should have known once he shook hands with the ghost that wasn't there, that something was going on. But do you think that they could actually bamboozle the American people once again?
Yes, because Democrats want to be bamboozled. Democrats don't want to talk about the record. They don't want to talk about the issues. And they are perfectly happy to believe whatever they're told to believe, as long as they trust that the leadership of their party is putting up a fight against Donald Trump. Democratic voters no longer have any coherent, unifying set of values. The only thing that brings them together is their shared fear of Donald Trump, who was a very effective president for 4 years. And in my book, I explain could be a very effective president in the first week of his administration. I outline over 200 executive orders and actions that he could take immediately. And these would implement conservative policies and really get our country back on track very quickly without having to wait for Congress or Democrats to avoid a filibuster. And that's what motivates Democratic voters. They believe a lot of nonsense too. They have a lot of irrational fears of what Trump might do. You hear a lot of that in the campaign rhetoric already. I heard one Kamala Harris surrogate talk about saving the earth that we live on, as if even if all of the worst predictions of climate change came true, somehow the planet itself would disappear. So they are locked into a kind of bubble of beliefs and hoaxes. And we all are to some extent. We have our own biases and we all have beliefs that may or may not stand up to reality. But the one that Democrats have is especially strong because it's reinforced by the power of the institutional media. So they're basically having a party ID election. Here where I live in California, we saw this in 2021. California is run very badly. Nobody particularly likes Gavin Newsom. The state has problems with crime, with homelessness, with pollution, with wildfires, poverty, you name it. We're doing everything wrong. But what brings the state together to reelect Democrats over and over again is fear of Republicans and, more recently, fear of Trump. So in 2021, Newsom was up for recall. There were enough voters in the state who wanted to pull him out of office and put someone else in his place. And during the summer before the recall, the polls were suggesting that he could very well lose. But once they identified Larry Elder, my friend Larry Elder, as the sort of black Donald Trump, and they identified...
Well, he's the black face of white supremacy that they told us.
Right, but especially he's the black Donald Trump. That was what really resonated with Democrats. And suddenly they put aside all of their policy objections to Newsom, all of their frustration with the lockdowns, with the corruption, with the hypocrisy of Newsom going to the fancy French Laundry restaurant after he told all the other restaurants to close. They put aside all of that and they just came home to their party. And that's what you're seeing in August as there has been one great news cycle after another for Kamala Harris, first getting the nomination, then nominating Tim Walz as her running mate, who's a completely mediocre candidate from the cold version of California, which is Minnesota. Basically, his policies are the same as Gavin Newsom's, sometimes even more extreme. He brings nothing to the ticket, but they made it out as if it were a fantastic choice, even though they knew that Josh Shapiro would have been a better choice from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. But anyway, they have allowed her to enjoy this. And then, of course, the Democratic National Convention. Chicago, by the way, which is my old hometown, is the worst place for Democrats to have a convention because Chicago is a showcase of everything wrong with Democratic Party misrule. You've got high crime, violent crime. You've got a stagnating economy, rising taxes, people leaving the city and leaving the state if they can, businesses, big companies leaving, Boeing leaving, Ken Griffin taking Citadel Group out of the state, LaSalle Street in Chicago no longer the financial center it once was. This is all happening because of one party rule by Democrats, and Democrats who don't know how to get along with different constituencies, who insist on having it their way or no way. So they've managed to defy all of the reality, and that's because the media protect Kamala Harris. They don't put pressure on her to do interviews. They don't put pressure on her to have unscripted moments where she reveals either what she's really thinking or the fact that she's not thinking. And that's where we are. The good news for Republicans is that Donald Trump is running a very strong campaign, even if it's struggling uphill to some extent against the media pressure, against the uniparty, some of the never-Trumpers still hanging around. But Donald Trump's running a very good campaign. He could do slightly better than 2020 in terms of the vote result and win the election. If you look at a map, and you can play with these electoral college maps on various different websites, if Kamala Harris wins almost every single state that Biden won in 2020, but loses Pennsylvania and loses, let's say, Michigan, then it's a 269-269 tie that goes to the House of Representatives. And if that House is still controlled by Republicans in a majority of the states, then Trump becomes the next president. There's also the possibility that Trump wins Michigan or he wins Georgia, and you start to see the margins creeping up a little bit. So I think that she took a gamble in selecting Walz and not selecting Shapiro. Pennsylvania is no longer in play the way it might have been if she had Shapiro. I do think it'll still be close there, but Republicans have a better chance of taking that state now. And then she's got to defend all these other states. I don't think she's going to defend all of them successfully. So we're looking at probably a very close race going into November and maybe a narrow Trump victory. If he does even better going down the stretch, it could be a big Trump victory. But we have to remember that in this crazy system that Democrats have forced on us now, we have early voting that begins in September in some places. So this election basically ends almost as soon as it's begun. And Kamala Harris gets the benefit of all this positive press. Remember also, I was in Milwaukee for the Republican convention. It was one of the best Republican conventions I've ever been to. And they had 4 days in which not only to talk about Donald Trump and to celebrate his miraculous survival of an assassination attempt, but also to talk about Joe Biden and everything wrong with Joe Biden. Well, they're not going to get another 4 days to talk about Kamala Harris because the convention perhaps was so effective that the Biden people realized he was done. And now the Democrats get this restart. They're going to attack Donald Trump for 4 days, but there's not going to be a rebuttal. And then voters are just going to go to the polls. That's it. So this election is basically almost over. There's very little that can change it. But again, the good news is that Pennsylvania is very much there for Trump to win. And Trump has been doing well enough in some of these other states where he could win some of the states that Biden needed to win in 2020. So I think there's room for cautious optimism among Trump supporters. Although, again, with vote by mail, you never know what's going to happen. I encourage people to vote by mail if they can and help other people do it. It's unfortunately the system we're stuck with, but no democracy in the world other than ours has forced this ridiculous system upon itself. In every other democracy, you show up at the polls, usually with photo ID. You have to register in advance. You have to show up on the day. There's very little absentee voting. There's almost no early voting. You show up on election day. That's what elections are for. It's not just a right to vote. It's also a civic ritual in which you have a responsibility to participate in certain ways. That's how it used to be in this country. And other countries imitated us. And now we've decided to move to some other system that allows Democrats to run their own turnout model. Basically, Democrats say they're trying to help people express their political views, their right to vote and so forth. But the way it really works is Democrats vote for their voters. The party controls more of the mechanism when you have a vote by mail system, especially in states like California, where I live, where you have ballot harvesting that's legal. So the party basically votes for you. The party comes to you and says, let me help you mail this ballot. Let me help you fill out this ballot. We don't want the parties controlling the voting process. We should have, and I suggest this in my book, actually, an independent electoral commission that runs this so that you get back to the standard of an election day that's monitored in a way that's auditable, that's credible, that people will trust. So anyway, that's one of my suggestions in the book. I do think that Trump should focus on policy into this home stretch because Kamala Harris has terrible policies when she has them. And usually she just can't express a policy view. She doesn't know what she thinks. She hasn't thought it through. That's what tripped her up in 2019. I covered her in 2019. I covered her presidential campaign primary in Nevada, in California, in various places. And there was a lot of enthusiasm. People wanted to like her, but they always left disappointed because she simply can't explain what she wants to do for the country. She's exciting as an idea, Black, female, Asian American, whatever she wants to be. And, you know, as Americans, we like that. We like that idea that anybody can be anything in America. But ask her what she wants to do, ask her what her policies are, and she either takes ridiculous positions and says ridiculous things, or she has no idea. So I think Trump has to focus on his record, which was very successful for 4 years in office, and on policies and what he's going to do when he gets back into office. The reason I wrote the book was I was frustrated with all the prosecutions against Trump, and I wanted to envision what it would look like when he overcame all of that. And I also realized that the moment he gets into office, when he takes the oath of office, the media is going to say that his presidency is already over. He's a lame duck. Let's talk about the candidates for 2028. They don't want to have any honeymoon. He's not going to be able to govern if they have their way. So I said, let him come into office with a set of actions he can take on day one, where he doesn't have to wait for Congress. He doesn't have to ask anybody's permission. I'm not a big guy on executive power. I really prefer the balance of powers, the separation of powers. So I've designed these executive orders and actions to respect the constitutional limits on the presidency, but there's so much he can still do to make a huge difference. And that's why I wrote the book. That's what the book's about.
And Joel, I want to talk about some of the executive actions that you discuss in your book, The Agenda. So everyone, hang tight. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Are you prepared for the unexpected? As a former emergency manager, being prepared is not a choice, it's a necessity, and that's where the wellness company comes in. Imagine having the peace of mind that you're equipped to handle any medical crisis, from tick bites to the latest pandemic. The wellness company's medical emergency kit is your lifeline, packed with essential medications like ivermectin, emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and more. This kit is your ultimate preparedness solution. The wellness company's team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and more. They are truth-seeking doctors, and they have designed a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention. Don't wait for the next crisis to strike. Visit twc.health/PAS and use promo code PAS for an exclusive 10% discount just for being a listener of this show. Prepare today, rest easy tomorrow. Use code PAS at checkout. Welcome back, everyone. So, Joel, I want to get into the agenda. Before I do, quick question. Do you find it at all ironic that the person now leading the Democratic ticket has not gotten a single primary vote in 2020, didn't get a single primary vote in 2024, and she's been anointed, as this comes from the party that constantly warns us about threats to democracy? And more to that, you know, when we look at the former president of the United States, he's not just going up against a Democratic nominee. He's also going up against the entire party apparatus, the media, the bureaucracy, big tech, you name it, he's going up against it. These are very powerful entities, and I know that he should stick to policies, that it's important that Trump talks about policy. But at the same time, shouldn't he also talk about Kamala Harris being engaged in one of the largest conspiracy and cover-ups in American history by shielding the president's condition?
I don't think people care about that anymore. I think she just is.
Does that say something about our country that you have the biggest conspiracy and cover-up and nobody really cares? We're not talking about it anymore.
It's just obvious. I mean, you can make the point, but she's not doing anything different than all the other Democrats did. Tim Walz did the same thing. He came out of a White House meeting with Joe Biden after the presidential debate that Biden bombed and said that Biden is fit to run the country and that he's the candidate to beat Donald Trump. That's Tim Walz. Now he's her running mate. You know, these people will say or do anything to stay in power or close to power. I don't view it as this issue people want to hear about anymore. I think people want to know, even if they do want to hear about it, who are you talking to? You're talking to Republicans who are already on your side, right? What Americans want to know is who's going to lead the country forward. We've got high interest rates. Kids graduate from college and they
No,
don't think
nothing.
they know nothing, but they're never going to be able to afford a home. That's what I hear from people. We have a plummeting birth rate in this country, which means that young people aren't starting families. They have no optimism about the future. We have massive recruitment problems in the military because it went woke with transgender ideology and the rest of it. We've got threats all around the world. Trump had 4 years of peace. Now Biden's presided over 4 years of chaos, of terrorism rising again. Our allies are in trouble. I mean, do you want this to continue? That's really what we got to be talking about, because Trump has answers. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz do not. Tim Walz gave free tuition, free healthcare to illegal aliens. You think he's going to be a guy who reinforces border czar Kamala Harris's will on the border? I mean, she's completely AWOL on the border. Now, if you say that she was the border czar, they get fact-checky on you and they say, no, she was just there to address the root causes from Central America. Well, did she do that?
Yeah, either way, she didn't do a very good job.
Did we suddenly see an influx of people from all over the world? I mean, they've tried to pretend this was just the northern triangle of countries in Central America. We have people from China, from Kazakhstan, from Africa, from islands like Haiti coming in. I mean, this is not because of the root causes in these countries. It's also because we don't enforce the law at the border. And that's a choice that Biden made and that Harris went along with, and Walz is going to go along with as well. That, to me, is actually the top issue in this election.
They'll build more shelters. If Kamala Harris is elected, they will build more shelters in the urban areas that are already struggling, where the infrastructure is already poor, where the schools are already failing. And the message of optimism has to be beamed out.
I got news for you. They're not going to build the shelters. They're going to take over existing buildings. They're going to move people out of schools.
Yeah.
Because Democrats can't build anything. We're talking about Democrats, okay? Joe Biden allocated $7.5 billion for electric vehicle charging stations, and they built 8. That's over 2 years. They built 8. Why? Because unlike Trump, who cuts through the red tape to get a project done, Biden and Harris have to satisfy the party, which means you've got to satisfy every government bureaucracy that wants to do a study. And then you've got to satisfy every public sector union that wants to make sure it gets the contract. And then you've got to satisfy every local official who has patronage employees that they have to make sure get paid. And by the time you get to the end of the process, you're out of money. Nothing's been built. Everyone's just been paid off. You got to come back to Congress and ask for more money. That's how Democrats do it. So I don't think they're going to build shelters for these migrants. We're going to see more homelessness. We're going to see people moved out of schools, maybe out of nursing homes, who knows, to make room. They're going to be trying to get the taxpayer to buy more hotels or buy office buildings and rehab them. I mean, Democrats can't build anything. So if you want a forward-looking future for the country where people can actually take grasp of the future and do something with it, you have to vote Republican. But if you're okay with this sort of decline that we're in right now, where in a few years we're going to be sitting ducks for China, because not only will they be more powerful than us militarily and economically, but we won't have the will to stand up to them. We are a nation that will have accepted defeat, and we'll have to learn Mandarin, and we'll have to learn to adjust to whatever they want to impose on us, as Hollywood's already adjusted by censoring itself, because we don't have any confidence in ourselves, and we don't have people willing to stand up to nonsense like the trans ideology and the rest of it and say, hey, wait a minute, men are men, women are women. We need to have families. We need to get out there. We need to have babies. We need to raise children properly. We need to get people skills, not just computing, coding skills, but life skills. And we need to get people back in churches. We need to get reacquainted with the founding values and traditions of this country. I mean, that's the way to success, and Trump represents that.
All right, everyone, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we get back, we're going to talk about what Trump should be doing in his first 100 days in office. Everyone hang tight. We're going to be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Joel, author of The Agenda, you list some impactful things, the executive actions that President Trump could take within his first 100 days in office. So from your book, can you just give the audience a few ideas of what are some of the first things that President Trump should do if he returns back into office?
Well, I start with the rule of law, because for me, that's fundamental. So you've got to end the political prosecutions by the Department of Justice. He's got to pardon all of these non-violent January 6th offenders. I think if you committed acts of violence and vandalism, you should serve some time. But if you walked across the lawn of the Capitol, you should not have been convicted of anything. Then there need to be investigations, real investigations of who was behind the Russia collusion hoax, who was behind the various other conspiracy theories that they've spun. And we need to know, for example, who's behind all the violence on our campuses. Why isn't the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division out there investigating all these anti-Semitic hate groups that are involved in our cities and on our campuses? Because that's what ought to be happening. So I start with,
especially when you hear students chanting "Death to America, Death to Israel." I mean,
and who's funding that? I mean, it's possible. We have the law enforcement tools to find out who's funding that, who's organizing it. It's all happening interstate, so federal government has jurisdiction, but nothing's happening.
But it's also happening into, I actually wrote an article about it. We're also seeing money come in from overseas from some notorious, you have Iran that is funding groups that come into the United States. You have Qatar that gives tons of money to the higher education system.
But there's some kind of an organization called Westpac in Westchester County, New York, that's funding a lot of this. Why are they allowed to continue operating? Why don't we know what they're doing? I mean, again, these are things the federal prosecutors can find out if they're given the task. And if they won't do it, you've got to either appoint a special counsel or have a congressional investigation, but you've got to go after them. So there's rule of law, because America is nothing if we don't have rule of law. And then you go after the border, okay? We've got to build the wall. We've got to deport people who come here illegally. And nobody who came here illegally during the 4 years of Joe Biden should be allowed to stay, certainly not to achieve any kind of citizenship. We absolutely have to go after that and secure the border. I actually say in my book that we should stop all immigration, at least for a certain period of time, until we can sort out our immigration system and make sure that our border is secure. And then when you start legal immigration again, you start with merit, you start with skills. You have to get rid of the family chain migration system of migration or immigration. And you have to add the immigrant question to the census. Remember, that was the only Supreme Court case Trump lost, where he added a citizenship question, or are you in the country legally? I forget how it was phrased, but he wanted to ask if people were immigrants or if they were citizens. And the Democrats challenged that, and they won on a technicality, really. But he could actually do that, do it in the right administrative way this time. And we need to know, because what's happening is Democrats are gaining congressional seats by allowing all of these illegals into the country, because right now the rule is you have to count all the people in a state, whether they're here legally or not, and they get congressional representation based on the population, not the legal resident population or the citizen population. So I go after all that border security, then inflation and the economy. Now, the Federal Reserve has the most power over inflation. They can lower interest rates and grow the economy, which sometimes allows inflation to rise, or they can raise interest rates, as they've done right now, to try to drive down inflation. But there are a lot of things that the federal government can do, and especially the president. And one thing that President Trump could do is cancel all of these freebies that Biden has allowed to linger, the student loan freebies and some of the others, which are inflationary, because if people don't have to pay their student loans, they spend money on other things. And that's one thing he could deal with right away. And so on and so forth. I go into foreign policy. I talk about faith and allowing prayer, or actually encouraging prayer or a moment of reflection at White House meetings. We don't see that ever, but we ought to. This country needs to get back into touch with its spiritual foundations. And I say that as a Jewish person living in a majority Christian country. I'm not afraid if somebody opens a public meeting with a Christian prayer. We need that, because kids are growing up today without any sense that there's a higher power, and they are rudderless, completely clueless. And so they look for authority to TikTok, to Taylor Swift, to whoever, and they don't know what to do. And so they're willing to believe anything. And that's why we see them running around the streets and rioting in 2020 and over the last several months, with all this Middle East tension somehow importing itself into our country through these activists. So I have all of that sketched out, and it's all doable. It's not pie in the sky stuff. It doesn't depend on endless pieces of legislation or negotiation. What I have in the agenda are steps that Trump can take from day one.
And do you think that when you say that, we're seeing the breakdown of the family unit, we're seeing people move away from faith, our pews going empty, we see people being less charitable and less volunteerism, do you think that shows a failed education system where we don't promote actual civics, that now it's based more on activism and far left radical ideologies, as opposed to what is America about? What's the roles and responsibilities of our institution? What does self-government mean? And what's our role within this system?
It's not a failure of education. It's actually a success of education, because our educational system is indoctrinating people to move away from these things. It's a failure of inspiration. We're not inspiring American kids to believe in themselves, to believe in something higher, and to be motivated to achieve the great things that life has to offer. I mean, I say this as a father of 3 kids going on 4. Being a married person, male or female, husband or wife, is just about the greatest experience you can have if you meet the right person and you are able to earn a living and raise a family. And there are everyday challenges that we all face, but that becomes part of the adventure. And somehow we haven't convinced enough young people that that's fun, that that's worth doing, that that's worth trying. People know marriage and family largely through Instagram and Facebook posts, but they don't understand how it's really a heroic journey that we all go on. And we may fail. We may have a first marriage that breaks up and you try again with someone else or whatever, but it's a heroic journey. And it's inspiring because the idea is that you're walking with God this entire way, that you're forming a union with somebody. I don't care what religion you are, but you're forming a union with the wing, in a sense, of some divine presence over you. So you're partners with God in creating new life or in creating a family. And that's really exciting. It's thrilling and it's fun, and it can be sexy and zany and whatever. But we're not letting kids see that. And instead, we're just talking about social change as the highest aspiration. So being part of a protest is the way to achieve meaning in your life. And so we have these kids running around completely clueless, causing chaos and wondering why they're not enjoying it.
Well said, and wondering why they're so depressed and anxious, too. Everyone needs to check out The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Great read. I'll have links up at the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Joel, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.